Hello and welcome, everyone. My name's Ted Gioia. I'm the Program and Development Director here, and it truly is a special evening. We are standing above a facility that is the only place in the United States that makes books entirely by hand, from comma to cover. And the type of books we make are the most painstaking and perfectionist books, where we craft every single element by hand. And we can say that that is a comma by Diane Newell, or that is a... Actually, I made a mistake there, because actually, Chris Bronco is our comma carver. And Diane is one of our bookbinders. But you can see my enthusiasm to share this craft is booming over. And we're really thrilled today because even though we are 50 years old, it often feels like we are meeting most of San Francisco for the first time tonight. So it is a thrilling opportunity for us to take a tradition that is not only 50 years old, but often even centuries or millennia old, and tell that story in a new way to folks tonight. And there is no better text to bring a fresh approach to a classic text than Gilgamesh. And for those who do not know, Gilgamesh predates Homer's Iliad by a millennia, the Old Testament by 6 centuries, and the Epic of Gilgamesh is essentially humanity's oldest surviving literary work, and every literary trope, from the buddy comedy to the fantasy epic, has almost been prefigured by Gilgamesh. And we are thrilled to present a conversation with 3 people here tonight. The first is Blake Riley, who is our lead printer and creative director and has really guided every decision on the craft and the physical presentation and the design of the book. And then I'm really thrilled to introduce our 2 featured presenters here tonight. The first one is the man to my right, Nicholas Basbanes. Nicholas Basbanes is America's leading cultural historian of books. He has authored 10 nonfiction works on book culture, including On Paper and the best-selling A Gentle Madness, Bibliophiles, Bibliomanes, an Eternal Passion for Books, which is often honored as the single greatest history of book collectors. His most recent book, Cross of Snow, was named a Book of the Year by the Times Literary Supplement, and his writing has appeared in outlets from the New York Times to the Washington Post to the Book Collector. He was the inaugural speaker in the Kirkpatrick series, Arion's premier talk series about the place of books in public life, and he returns to write the introduction for Gilgamesh here tonight. Then our artist tonight is a true legend. Barry Moser, renowned artist, printmaker, illustrator, was born in 1940. His bibliography comprises over 400 titles, and his work is held in over 150 museums and libraries, from the National Gallery of Art to the Library of Congress to the Vatican. How many people do you know who are in the Vatican's collection? He taught at the Rhode Island School of Design before joining the Smith College faculty, where he is the Erwin Pauline Alpert Glass Professor of Art, and his many fine press publications include the celebrated Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which won the 1983 National Book Award. And in fact, he created 45 years ago, half a century ago, 100 wood engravings for Arion's Moby Dick in 1979, and Rolfe may have even sold it short because that book is often credited as the single greatest work of fine press publishing in the 20th century. And we are thrilled, after 46 years, to return to Arion for the first time to collaborate on a full book with his work for Gilgamesh. This is a book that was really born in friendship, and it started really with you, Nick. Could you share a little bit how this book started?
It just seemed to me, being the inaugural lecturer here in the Kirkpatrick Lecture Series, and Taylor's here, nice to see him, and developing this affection for this facility, for what you've done, for this institution. It's beyond, you're not just a fine press publisher, you're an institution, and you're unique now in the United States. And I saw also Barry Moser and I go back close to 50 years. I've known him, I admire him, I respect him. And it just seemed to me, and I know a little bit of the backstory, that he did this wonderful, extraordinary, great book with Arion Press back in 1979 and hasn't done one with you since. And since I know Barry very well, and I know you guys very well, I'm not necessarily a matchmaker, but it just seemed to me that an introduction was in order. And first of all, I said, Barry, what do you think? He said, if they want me, I'd love to do it. And I said, Ted, what do you think? Well, seriously, you can bring us Barry Moser? I said, yeah, I think I can introduce you. And so that was really the motivation. The motivation was, I love Barry, I love Arion Press, I love what you both stand for. And it just seemed, and then there's a bit of selfishness here as well. I think we'll probably get into it a little bit later. But Barry and I have go back 40-something years, and we do admire each other. I mean, it's a mutual admiration society, I think. And we've often said we'd love to do something together, and that this wasn't conditional on the trying to bring you together, but if we could do something together on this, it would be a treat for both of us, certainly for me. And so there was a double motive, and I think what you see we're discussing here tonight is the culmination of that.
What was it like for you, Barry, coming back to work for Arion?
What was the question?
What was it like working with Arion again? Whatever question you want to answer, Barry.
Well, I know you were talking about my having been absent from the ranks at Arion Press for all these years, and the thing that is going to always come to me when this subject comes up is how much of a circle it was for me to come back and to find that that circle would end up joining itself as a whole thing. And when I was out there in November, nothing I ever experienced had moved me so emotionally as to reconnect with the press because of, parting circumstances 50 years ago.
Nick.
Having to do with bringing an epic to life, I want to comment on one thing that Nick said, though I'm not sure I heard all of it. When we were talking about what book we might do together, and Gilgamesh came up, I had to say, listen, I never read it. So I didn't know what I was getting into. But that's nothing unusual for me. I don't mind jumping into, I knew it wouldn't be awful. It wasn't like somebody had asked me to do Mein Kampf or anything. Yep. So it was a matter of bringing characters to life.
Well, Nick, you are the one who suggested Gilgamesh, and could you say a little bit about why you thought it was a book with appropriate gravitas?
Well, you touched on it. It's our earliest known surviving literary work, 4,200 or so years old. And there's a bit of selfishness involved here, too. I'm writing a book for Yale University Press on pre-paper substrates, not to get into it, but so I've been spending a lot of time studying clay, papyrus, bamboo, silk, parchment, everything that was used to write prior to the invention of paper. So I have spent a lot of time studying cuneiform, clay tablet, and there we're looking there's an image right there. That's the famous 11th tablet, the tablet that was discovered by George Smith in 1872. It announced that he had deciphered this text, and it was announced on the front pages of newspapers around the world as a Chaldean account of the flood, predating, the account in the book of Genesis and the Old Testament by hundreds of years, and it was a flood account, and it just electrified the world. And it just seemed to me that this beginning work seemed so appropriate in an eventful year for Arion Press, and something that Barry would enjoy doing, and that I might enjoy doing with him. So there was a bit of selfishness involved there, but I'll confess to it gratefully.
Nick, I'm wondering, can you confirm the apocryphal story that George Smith, who was the, what would you call him?
He was the
decipher, the Assyriologist.
Did he take his clothes off? Is that what
he
you're
took his
asking?
clothes off when he made the discovery and danced around the room?
We Connie and I we were in London over New Year's, actually, and we met with Irving Finkel, you've probably heard of him. He's a very famous Assyriologist at the British Museum.
It's classic for Nick to invoke the famous Assyriologist.
Yes, right. But Barry, he looks a lot like Barry Moser now that I'm looking. He's got this big flowing white beard. And so, but and he has a picture of George Smith outside his office because he was the predecessor. And I asked him, is this true about, he said, he probably took his clothes off, he was excited, but he was probably also having an epileptic fit of some sort. But he had discovered, and he was young, very young man, and all of a sudden he was breathless. He lost his breath, and he realized what he was reading. He was reading this account. It's not just the account of a guy that goes out on an ark with some animals in the boat, that he gathers up, and he's told he's going to save humanity, and he sends a dove out to find, see if there's any land around, and there are these echoes that you see. He was excited, and then he announced it to the world in 1872 at a meeting in London, and it was quite a story. So yes, he was a little bit.
The story, for those of you who are not fully versed in the annals of Assyriology, there's a famous episode in the 1870s where a self-taught Assyriologist named George Smith suddenly deciphered this, what looked like it was just a stone like this, and realized
that's the stone.
This
right
is the
there.
stone. My apologies and that this stone actually's account of the flood predated the Bible, and it was such huge news that it was on every front page across the newspapers. And there's an apocryphal story. He was so excited he took off all of his clothes and danced through the British Museum. But this
apocryphal is a good adjective too, by the way.
But this connection between the tablet and was not just a historical artifact, it was also a key part of the design. And could you share a little bit, Blake, about how these clay tablets really influenced the palette and design for the book?
Well, it was daunting at the start to enter a project with Nick and Barry just from jump, let's say, much less to figure out how to find a way into a story that's over 4,000 years old, how we would interpret that at the press. And so kind of in the process of trying to figure that out, it seemed the best solution was to go to the primary source. And so we came upon the image of the 11th tablet of the flood, and we were very fortunate, and this is a rare occasion for the press, where Barry and I had started to work together many months in advance of our production on the book itself, due to his schedule. And we were able very quickly to determine the format for the woodcuts, roughly, how many to expect, and from that format, we were then able to extrapolate the page size and what the book might begin to look like in its, physical footprint. And so Barry began to carve blocks. Like one a week, Barry? It was like a Xerox machine, amazing what you were doing. And the 2 or 3 came in very early, including the one that you see on the left of the screen. Actually, this is a detail of the cedar forest image that appears in the book, which is on display in the gallery downstairs. And I thought, well, maybe if we take a section of that and abstract it, we could begin to build kind of a resonance with this fantastic clay object that, then kind of gave us a colorway to explore, and really tap into a sense of the geologic. That seemed to be kind of the what we could hope for the most. So.
And that goes right into our next section, which is really talking about, I want us to go through the story behind 2 images in this book, and Barry ultimately created 18 images. He promised 6, gave us 18, and that tells you something about Barry's work ethic. Even at this, even in his 80s, he outworks me. But we wanted to go through a hero and a monster to really excavate the process of how you conjure magical images from wood. And that magic really begins with a copious amount of research. And I realized this because midway through the process, Barry mentioned to me that he was just so damn tired of these Assyriologists spamming his email. And he would get emails like this. You could see the civilizing of Enkidu, an unusual tablet of the Babylonian Gilgamesh epic. And he is one of 349 readers of the Revue Assyriology, the Archaeologie Orientale, and then he showed me his recent reading history, and there's some real, he's gone deep, and some even appear to be in Russian. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit, Barry, what is your research process for creating an image?
Oh, Lord, that's funny because I don't even think for a minute that I read all that. I just keep all those articles in case I have to make a talk about Gilgamesh sometime. I got a lot of research material in hand. My research is unlike any kind of academic research. I capture an image of something in my head, and then I go out into the world, and I start looking for images. My images are always based in reality. I don't invent things. I invent the whole illustration, the whole woodcut, but I don't. I lost my thought.
No, well, what kinds of things did you look at when you were creating your image of Gilgamesh, your first image of the title character?
Thank you for recovering me. I look for big men, and one of the first places I went was to the NFL, and looking at the guys that play the tackles and the guards, and then I went from that to some places that are not terribly comfortable for me. I mean, a lot of naked men who are incredibly well built. And then I also go into art history. I love finding images that I can recycle. So that's the way I begin the research, is collecting things like this, making notes, and then eventually I make the image from all of these things. I deduce into one.
And I love, my single favorite folder title of any I've ever seen is Zounds, Maybe Not, Maybe Not. But just seeing how many you've got: sword, axes, hammers, hair, copper box, Assyrian armor artifacts. And this is just a number of images that you cited in your research. And here are some Assyrian images. I did not include any of the naked men in this image.
Almost, right there,
except for this gentleman. But in all of this compounded to create to this image as Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
And could you tell us why you depicted Gilgamesh in this fashion?
Well, I didn't want to see Gilgamesh face to face. I feel that that's your prerogative, not mine. We don't actually ever see his face. You know what he looks like when you read the book, and the way you see him is the way you should keep him. You should capture him in the way you see him, not the way I see him. So that's why we look at him from behind. Besides, I had some great source material for very muscular, masculine backs. And then I was able to fit him out with an appropriate helmet with that big brush on top. And I will say something here that I need to say about these things is that this is not a human figure we're looking at. Well, actually, this is a woodcut. That's a piece of paper with some ink on it. That's all it is. That's the pragmatic face of it. So when I'm working, I am working primarily on how the black and white is working together, rather than what Gilgamesh looks like. So that's almost secondary for me.
Here is the actual woodcut that you carve. Typically, how many versions do you carve of a scene, of a character in wood before you're reach the image you're content with?
Yeah, usually I get it in one block.
Oh.
But there's an awful lot that goes in the garbage before I get around to that block, though. Sometimes I don't get it right, and I sit the blocks around in the studio. I see them, I monitor them every day. I keep passing judgment. I'll pull one down, do a little more work on it. And I continue like that until I'm perfectly satisfied with them. But Then I get an impression of it. It turns around backwards, and I see it. I mean, I'm so used to doing that, it doesn't usually make any difference. But when I turn it around backwards, sometimes something does spark and says, oh, I got to correct that. Or, as often as not, I just start over again.
Blake, how did Barry's woodcuts influence the design and layout and format for the book?
Well, as I mentioned, we agreed on this 5x7 format that Barry had been working in cherry wood that was comfortable in his hand. And from that, we were able to kind of, add 2-inch margins around and a little extra at the bottom, and all of a sudden we had a 9x12 book for the page size. The kind of challenge that created for us on the production side was to how to balance the page. We had built everything around these woodcuts, but we also had the text to contend with. And when dealing with the verse, typically the first thing we'll do is look for the longest line in the poem, and that will determine the measure on which we can set the text on. Having found that, I think it was on the 10th tablet, that longest line gave us what turned out to be roughly a 30 pica width column for the text. But because we had already committed to the 9x12, that created some awkward margins on the page. And so we had to solve for that. And the kind of solution that we ended up with, you'll see running along the bottom of the page, is this footer that allowed us really to essentially create a plinth on which the text could sit atop of, and extend the margins of the page out so it didn't appear as though the verse was being swallowed by the area surrounding it. And it also provided this wonderful opportunity to deploy some historic type from the type collection, which Ted has brought up here, this black letter Salzmann schrift, whose origin we haven't been able to track down yet, except it's part of the inheritance from the European type foundries that has been collected at the press over the past 100 years. And this particular typeface seemed to bring a little bit of drama with it, as well as instead of that very heavy black letter that we often associate with the style, a certain kind of contemporary freshness. And that was, I think, the other primary challenge of this book, is how you do bring the 4,000-year-old tale to life on the page and make it modern, make it contemporary, look like it belongs to the 21st century. And this type, maybe gets us a little closer to that.
One interesting thing about the Arion process is because we have the second largest collection of metal type in the country, basically books begin by finding the typeface. And so the typeface that really balances and activates and enlivens Barry's artwork, and you needed something really strong to pair with the heavy woodcuts that Barry's doing, is one of the key elements in bringing one of our books to life.
I should add to that, Ted. It's interesting because, our world is actually made a little bit easier in those selections because the type collection is self-selecting. Unlike on your computer when you scroll down and there are 3,000 typefaces to choose from, we have, a subset of that. And so when, we go to the cases and look for a type that is complementary to the kind of bold and dramatic lines that Barry is carving, maybe we end up with a selection of half a dozen at the most, and then it's a matter of kind of figuring out which of those is going to fit the longest line. So we're able to hone in pretty quickly, because of those constraints.
Well, I wanted to go to the next section, is the anatomy of a monster, and Barry is famous for his monsters. Over 400 books. Here is one of the Jabberwock, one of his famed illustrations. And I wanted to ask you, Barry, how do you go about creating your monsters?
Well, like I said earlier, I get a vision in my head, get an idea of where I want to go. In other words, I want to know that I'm going for some reptilian kind of creature as opposed to some rhinoceron kind of creature. So that's the first step. And then when I do that, I just dig in and start looking and looking and looking and listening to an awful lot of music.
Um, well,
And I listen to music all the time, and I used to do all my research in magazines and my scrap file, which was huge until I discovered Google, and I don't need it anymore. So I do an awful lot of Google searches. So I'll look for, I try to avoid the cute, the corny, and the obvious. So that's my big thing. And I think that this Jabberwock, now that I look at him or her, whichever it is, this far removed, I'd like to do it over again.
well, that's so interesting, Barry, because the first monster that Gilgamesh encounters is called Huwawa or Humbaba, depending on the translation, who is the guardian of the cedar forest, and whose description is largely lost in the only little fragments described remain. So it's things like, his mouth is fire, and his roar the floodwater, and seven terrors are the garments of Huwawa. So it's a very complicated challenge to visualize, and I had the pleasure of going through Barry's diaries, and this was one of his lines was, "Today I picked up the big bab Humbaba," and you can see all of the different elements from goat horns, apes, and gorillas that potentially went into it. Could you tell us just a little bit about the inspirations that you melded together for your Huwawa?
Well, first I have to tell you that I favor Humbaba because my kids and my students call me Bubba, so that just kind of falls in line. I was looking for something that was, Humbaba was a shapeshifter. I mean, he could be a goose, or he could be an ape, he could be anything. So I just started collecting all kinds of little pieces from here and there, an awful lot from the, I guess, the microscopic world, because that can be pretty hideous down in that world. So I collect those things, I put them together. I wonder what that would look like if I put that head on this thing. Oh, or how about those whiskers? That'd be great on Enkidu, maybe, So I see these things and they suggest something that then I take a note of, put it aside, use it again if I can, if I need to. But these are the things that I'm looking at, listening to music.
This is my favorite, Barry. The
That's
rhinoceros.
a baby rhinoceros. Would you believe that?
And,
Doesn't even have any teeth yet.
and here is where you arrived at.
Yeah. So that you'll see right on Huwawa's left side, there's a bubble there. Well, that's an air sac from some creature that I found. And then the spines are from a creature about the size of a hydra, which is one of the lowest forms of life, is the simplest forms of life. And otherwise, it's a rhinoceros with alligator skin or something like that. Listen, when I'm cutting a block and I get cutting into those little dots and things, each one of them is the mark of a tool. And I get into that and I'm meditating on this, that, or the other thing and listening to music, and I just go to town. It's kind of hard to get me to stop.
Well, your process, Barry, of piecing together this jigsaw of different inspirations and materials, actually very similar to how we make our books here at Arion. And
Yeah.
This was Blake's concept wall for the design and materials of Gilgamesh. Could you share a little bit, Blake, about the different materials you gathered and how you kind of created the overall package and the overall object of the Gilgamesh book?
was really important for us to kind of make that connection between, as you were discussing the mark of your hand, the mark making that you create, and that relationship to the cuneiform text, which is, fashioned in not that much different a manner. The Babylonians were, impressing reeds into wet clay and creating these wedge forms, and that's not really unlike the chiseling that you're doing into the cherry. So that was kind of a happy connection to make.
But
as
each
for the
book
concept wall, I think that's maybe a euphemism.
Well, say a little bit about the materials, because I pulled up that each of our books is really an amalgamation of materials across the globe. We have leather from Scotland, we have paper from Japan, we have paper from Britain, and it's really about bringing together all of these different influences that makes an Arion book. And I think the single material that really embodies that is this slate granite paper. So could you say a little bit about this and why we chose this material?
Well, this kind of was part of the attempt to invoke this geologic time. We were joking that we didn't even know what to call, 4000 BC. It wasn't, it's pre-Stone Age. But it just is this, time of elemental materials, and so we were kind of keeping our eye focused on that. And between Megan in the bookbindery, who's leading the charge there, and John Demerit, who's been working on the book design, we came upon this stone. This is actual stone veneer, and it's slate material that has a backing on it, so you can treat it like a book cloth, even though we believe it's really used more for kind of interior purposes and covering surfaces and whatnot.
So this is actual stone you can print on. And here is John and Blake debating how we're going to print on this stone. And then here's our final title card, where you can see each individual tag is slightly different because it's a different piece of stone with the pewter titling. And bringing in that stone element, really, and here is Diane working on our cover. And all of these elements and different materials, as many as 10 to 20 materials, all come together here in this sort of cover image. And there's this sort of beautiful element of, like, the same way that Barry brings together the rhinoceros and the bug and the microscopic, we bring together the stone, orange sienna, all different types of papers to make a unified cover. And I want to keep us going because I know we don't have infinite amount of time, but I wanted to really dig in on a comment that Nick made in the introduction, where he said this incredible comment where he says he really views Barry as significantly a portrait artist first and foremost. And could you say a little bit about Barry, the portrait artist?
Barry, well, you're looking at some of Barry's portraits. Now, there are two there from the Bible that he did. And Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you were at a restaurant in Northampton and there was a waitress there and you said, "That's my Virgin Mary," something like that.
Yes, that's a waitress in a restaurant that I frequent, and then that's Athol Fugard. Down below is Job, and I don't know who that is the Queen of Hearts.
But I think in a similar vein that you were at a function one night and the chef had his hair tied up, and you.
Oh, that's a different story. And that's going to get real long.
I know it's a different story, but this was your Jesus, though, right?
Oh yeah, I mean I find faces wherever I can, and whoever will whoever sit down for me for a while.
But I mean, I think you asked the guy, maybe you could let your hair down. He's trying to cook, and he was the chef. And you said, "Do you mind taking your hair down?" And I guess he did. This is the story you told me, and you asked him to pose, and the guy said, "What's going on?" You said,
"Yeah,
Do you mind?
There's a documentary on the making of that Bible where that young man, Lou Silver, is interviewed about that. It's called A Thief Among the Angels." But yeah, that's exactly true.
But the point is, he's looking for elements that kind of feed the vision that he has for the character. And he brought this to bear, in my view. It was one of my first impressions when I started to see the illustrations, that it's not just the individuals, the Gilgamesh and Enkidu and the Noah-like character. You'll have to forgive me for forgetting his name, too many syllables. But Barry is making portraits of these individuals, but he's also doing it of the creatures, like you saw.
It's so interesting because normally when people would depict gods or monsters, they would depict them from afar. But then you've decided to go very close. And could you share a little bit about that? What does portraiture mean to you? Why faces?
Okay, first of all, I hate backgrounds. To me, it dilutes whatever else I'm trying to deal with. If they're abstract, like the image on the lower left there, the image of Job, that's different. But if I just can't stand getting architecture, don't ask me. The answer is no, I will not do it. Or crowd scenes or things like that. So I like to come in on the subject that I'm seeing. I don't want to come in too close, and I don't want to see him or her too far away.
And one striking example is that your friend Alan Mandelbaum, who's the great translator who translated the Divine Comedy, which you then did illustrations for, you cast him as, Utnapishtim, who is the precursor to Noah.
Yeah.
Why do you look for mythical characters in everyday life?
Listen, there's no mystery to it. I mean, Alan's an old friend. Here's a character that I could have the opportunity to. I mean, Utnapishtim he's a wise man, and so and Alan was. So I see this. I put the two things together. I'm able, in this instance, to put a character in a clean, crisp turban. That's also the sorts of things that I'm looking for. What will make an interesting image? I mean, I could have made Utnapishtim bald, like Nick and me, if I wanted to, but I didn't.
Maybe
I
he
don't
is
want to. That's the thing. What's the image going to look like?
My only disappointment is you didn't put Nick into any of your portraits. But on the other,
I thought I would cast him as Humbaba once upon a time.
but the other side of your work, aside from the intimate portraits, is this sort of incredibly energetic scenes. And Blake, you would always describe working with Barry as Barry's sort of sense of cinematography, as though he were a filmmaker, and you really designed and thought of the books and the scenes through the lens of filmmaking. And could you share a little bit about that?
That often came up in our conversations as we were kind of looking at the sequence of images and what might be missing, but especially how we introduce the book. What the experience is when you first look at the slipcase and then you pull the book out and then get to that next image. So there's a kind of a series of establishing shots, essentially, that lead you into that title page. It's important to kind of get that rhythm right so that by the time the reader has bought the book, opened the package and kind of begun to immerse themselves into the story, that they are they arrive, all in, ready for the adventure, and
I would just like to add that there's also this key element of storytelling going on. It's narrative. Narrative is energizing everything Barry does. The portraits are telling a story. The images are. And Barry describes himself as kind of a filmmaker. He's designing not just the character, what the character is wearing, as he's described, but the scene, what's happening in the tablet. And the tablet, by the way, is another name for chapters. This poem was recovered in 12 tablets individually, and so these tablets are kind of individual chapters. So Barry was doing at least one image per chapter. So it's not just picking and choosing what I'm going to illustrate. He also is illustrating each of these chapters, and it's kind of a sequence. It's a flowing narrative. And I think one thing we should point out is that they're all very synergistic. They all work together, that you have one image, but it's also telling a sequence of images. And that's all part of the narrative structure to my view, to my way of thinking.
Absolutely, Nick. And one thing I also wanted to highlight, Blake, about the way that you worked with Barry is that you received one of our most striking images is the image of Gilgamesh Agonistes, and you received it and you weren't sure about the orientation, or that was undecided. Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So this is kind of a gut punch image that Barry just threw over the transom. We didn't even know it was headed our way. And, it depicts the moment where Gilgamesh has lost his pal, Enkidu, thanks to the wrath of the gods. And we weren't, it wasn't clear really kind of how Barry intended this image. So we looked at it, and then we looked at it upside down, which I think we'll see in the next slide. We realized that, something all of a sudden snapped, where that all of that, the grief just poured out of the image. And instead of looking like perhaps a moment of birth or resurrection in the original orientation, that instead you really get this kind of, just the collapse of this man who's lost his best friend.
After all of this work, I wanted to share, this is the actual final portrait, the final depiction of the form of the book. And it was decided that there was the cedar forest was the interior cover, but the slipcase was the gate to the underworld, the gate to the netherworld, which actually was the inspiration for the installation by the botanical sculptor Peter Sun downstairs. But there's a very intentional, almost dramatic setting where opening the book, you are entering the underworld, then you're entering the forest, and then it creates this sort of sense of film and a sense of drama going in. And I wanted to end by asking two questions. And the first is to Barry, and ask you, how was working with Arion Gilgamesh different from working on Moby Dick 45 years ago?
We don't have time for that. Well, I remember so distinctly meeting Andrew Hoyam at a cocktail party, and the conversation ensued, and he invited me and my girlfriend to come over to the shop, which was over there under the Transamerica building or somewhere in that neighborhood. And I went over, he was very cordial, showed me what he was up to with Moby Dick, asked me if I could cut 100 wood engravings inside a year, and being a brash 30-year-old, I said yes. And I took the job on, and that was probably in September. And by the time I got underway with the project, in April, an event happened, and Andrew and I did not speak to each other pretty much ever again. Moby Dick was finished, the last half of it was finished with no intercourse whatsoever between Mr. Hoyam and me. It all went through lawyers, his and mine. So you can imagine, I mean, that's the emotional thing that has dogged me for 50 years and has now undogged me, thanks to you all. Something for which I am eternally grateful. So I can't even tell you what the difference is. I mean, it's night and day. It's good and bad. Or bad and good.
Bad and good, thank you.
Okay. Got to get that right. No, I mean, I was working with one man back then because I had no latitude whatsoever. I mean, Andrew was actually correcting my drawings, telling me that the light was falling wrong on something or another. And anyway, it was pretty much hell on earth. but I got the job done, and I will give Andrew a lot of credit because he did design and produce one of the best books of the 20th century. And my name's not on the title page, and that's fine. That's the way it should be.
But
But no, it should be because I didn't really illustrate the book.
But-
Andrew illustrated the book. I just did the woodcuts or the
you will
engravings.
see-
Isn't that a lovely spread?
on this title page, Barry, you come even above Gilgamesh.
Oh, Jay,
So
I
we
never
tried
noticed
to
that.
correct, and
As it
I
should
wanted
be.
to give the last note to Nick, and just what does it mean to see your name
Well,
with Barry?
happily, Barry does have top billing, and it's what a pleasure it is for me to. If this were boxing, you're the main event and I'm the undercard. But I'm thrilled to be there with you. I mean, I just think of when my first book was published 30 years ago this summer, and that first copy arrived in the mail. And it's a feeling unlike anything you can describe in your life. It's just you're awash with joy and satisfaction. And to see my name on a title page with a man I've known and admired and loved like a brother all these years, and to actually have collaborated in a small way with you in a project, to have my name up there on the undercard with Barry Moser above Gilgamesh, it's really a great pleasure and a great honor, and I'll treasure it. It's wonderful. So.